Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help members of the military community thrive in their post-service career and life. Today is episode number 379, Rapid Iteration versus Building for Scale, with Vincent Martino, co-founder at VisitPay.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably not exactly like any other company or curve, but it was very flat for a long time. And part of that was by design, right? We came in knowing we didn't have the grand idea. I've actually never met an entrepreneur. I'm sure they're out there, but I've never met an entrepreneur that said, I had the grand idea and it never had to change it. And that's what I did, right? We had an idea that we wanted to help solve, how healthcare bills get paid in the United States of America. We wanted something national in scope because we had the ego to believe we can go solve that, or the confidence to believe we can go solve that. So our first 4 or 5 years were pretty flat, and what we were doing was really just continually iterating on that idea we started with, right? We were continuing to fail fast. And then once we felt like we finally had it, we had this payment platform idea that was going to leverage the analytics we had developed and the intelligence that we had developed over those first 4 or 5 years. Our growth curve definitely started to, I don't want to say it hockey stick, but it definitely ramped.
Vincent's story is pretty much the opposite of the standard entrepreneurial success story that you've heard. Yes, he has experienced incredible success. His company, VisitPay, now has over 100 employees. 3 of his 7 C-suite executives are Service Academy graduates, and he has received over $26 million in funding from some of the best investors in the world like Norwest. However, where his story differs is that this didn't happen overnight. Vincent has been at this for nearly 12 years. His success didn't come all at once. It came through a sustained effort over a decade. What I love most about Vincent's story is how he elegantly merged 2 vital aspects of entrepreneurship that, to me at least, often seem to be completely opposite skill sets. That of, first of all, rapidly iterating, that is, building, learning, and reacting as quickly as possible to feedback from customers. And second of all, at the opposite extreme, building for scale. That is slowing down to build things properly so that it can sustain the load of a massive influx of customers. I learned so much from my conversation with Vincent and hope you do too. As always, at beyondtheuniform.org, you'll find show notes for this episode with links to everything we discuss, as well as over 370 other episodes just like this. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Vincent.
So I just took a couple of notes just in case half the time I forget to look at them though.
Sounds good.
I'm a blue and gold officer here, and I've been deluged today with blue and gold stuff. I'm like, where is this coming from?
It's whenever an interview like this gets scheduled, you can be sure that all this military stuff will just crop up.
I think the guy who runs the blue and gold today just basically decided he was going to get on top of things. I'm like, stop. He was actually one of my firsties when I was a plebe, which is crazy.
Oh, no way. It's a small world.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, joining me today in Eagle, Idaho, my guest is Vincent Martino. Vincent, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Hey, Justin, thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I want to give listeners quick background. Vincent is the co-founder of VisitPay, a company he started nearly 12 years ago that now has over 100 employees and has raised $26 million in funding from top-notch investors in like Norwest. 3 of his 7 C-suite executives are Service Academy grads. And his journey started at the Naval Academy. It included 5 years in the Marine Corps, followed by an MBA at the Wharton School of Business, and includes work at Dynamicsoft, Capital One, COO at a company called Balihoo, and co-authoring the book, The Marine Corps Way. So maybe, Vincent, just to start off, anything to add or amend with that bio?
No, that's a really great background. I appreciate it. So no, nothing to add right now.
Cool. And I have to thank Tom Kent, who was a guest on the show previously. He beat me up about not doing a better job on LinkedIn. And so I got into a flurry of reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and that's how I met Vincent. And then we talked, and I just heard a little bit of his story and was like, we've got to have you on the show. So that's how we ended up here. So maybe, Vincent, to start with, could you rewind the clock when you left the Marine Corps, what your decision process was like, and what that first job search was like for you?
Yeah, sure. Great questions. Going back, and it's over 20 years now that I actually got out of the Marine Corps, which is crazy to think about. It was actually a really hard decision. A lot of people always ask me, what made you, was it a hard decision to join the military, to go to the Naval Academy? And I always look back and like, no, those are no brainers, right? But they were not hard decisions. At least I don't remember them ever being hard decisions. Getting out of the military definitely was a tough decision. And it definitely wasn't like one thing that led to that decision. It was actually multiple things. And I was married at the time. And so my wife and I really had to balance a bunch of things. And, one of those things was my wife really wanted to be a physical therapist. And it just so happens there wasn't a Marine Corps base anywhere near any physical therapy school. So that was one thing that, and I was looking at, possible B billets or other types of shore-based roles where she could go to PT school. I was in telecom at the time, I was a communications officer, and I was looking at the world around me changing rapidly, right? The internet had just kind of come out while I was a communications officer. And, I was looking at how innovation was occurring in the civilian world, and I was attracted to that, right? I definitely saw opportunity outside the military. It wasn't that one thing that pulled me out of it, but, I really was looking at kind of the next challenge and a different challenge. And probably like the third biggest thing was, my wife and I definitely wanted to start a family. I respect and I greatly appreciate families who are able to raise their kids while in the military. But I was also starting to deploy a lot, right? All the Middle East activity was really starting to cycle up, and nobody really knew why at the time. This was pre 9/11, but knowing I'd be away a lot, and I had been away like I think 12 of 18 months right before I got out, and I knew it would be really hard to raise a family. And those three things combined is really what led me to my decision to get out of the Marine Corps. And what I decided to do was go and get an MBA, like you did, Justin. I felt like I had a lot of really great competencies I learned in the military. Any veteran knows you learn a lot of really great things about perseverance and getting the mission done and leadership. And I really thought I had some great competencies for the business world. But what I knew I didn't have was like a skill set. I didn't know, I didn't know how to do, finance. I didn't know accounting. I never even had an accounting class in my undergrad. And so I decided that the best route for me was to go get a full-time, do an MBA for 2 years while my wife went to physical therapy school. And that's what ultimately led me to what I did.
That's a question that people ask a lot too, is, so I kind of put you in the bucket of entrepreneurs, and I'm just kind of, hindsight's 2020, but looking back, if you were advising, let's say another Marine, and he's like, man, I want to be exactly where you are. I want to be running my own company. What would your thoughts be on whether or not to pursue either an advanced degree or an MBA in particular, if that's vital, if it's a nice to have, or kind of how to weigh that option?
That's a really good question. I know plenty of veterans, plenty of people who run companies that don't have an MBA, right? So it's definitely not a prerequisite to success in any way, shape, or form. I think given my specific scenario where I didn't have an accounting degree, I didn't even think about business classes when I was an undergrad. I was an engineer. I felt like I really needed that skill set. Like I couldn't have seen myself stepping into the civilian world, looking to run a division or even just a group of people without having just some fundamental, accounting, financial economics, type of background. So for me, that's what I felt like I needed. So the advice I'd give somebody is that if you feel like you lack that, then I think an MBA can make a lot of sense. I also think a part-time MBA could make as much or more sense than to a full-time MBA. Just my situation with my wife going to school full-time, it made sense. It was actually really nice for us to live together for 2 years while we were both students. But, I think you can do it part-time or full-time. And again, it just depends on yourself and your own situation.
And I think I remember you saying when we first talked that you were employee number 40, and in the company that this first company you were involved with sold to Cisco within
Mm-hmm.
like I think a year of your joining. And I'm just kind of curious, what was that experience like?
Yeah, and I know you asked me a second half of the question, which is what my kind of my first job experience is. So
Oh, yeah.
I,
Good. Yep.
I could bridge with that and then
Yeah,
answer
that
this.
works.
I didn't do a good job answering that first question. But well, during business school, it's real typical to do an internship, right? Which is looking back on it, it's like one of the best things you could do because it's no risk, right? And when I went to business school, I thought that I'd want to be an investment banker. You probably knew a lot of people, Justin, who wanted to be investment bankers. And I actually did an internship in investment banking. And what I realized was, and it was probably my military roots, I really like being hands-on. I like being operational. I love technology. I love, why I got out of the military was the innovation. One of the reasons I got out was to be a part of that. And investment banking is a great career, but at the same time, for me, I realized it made me realize what I really wanted was that hands-on kind of opportunity to lead. And I actually came across a company in New Jersey, which was called Dynamicsoft, that made voice over. It was one of the first companies to make voice over IP software. And my first kind of veteran experience is the CTO of the company, the chief technology officer, was also a former Marine and a Naval Academy graduate. So I met him, and he looked at my background, looked at my resume. It's like, you ever think about product management? And I was like, don't even know what that is, right? I didn't, at that time, I was not aware what product management was. And the more I looked into it, product managers really set the vision of ultimately of in the software space of a software product, right? How users interact with the product, what the roadmap of the product, the strategy of the product. You work with engineers, it can be very hands-on, especially in a junior capacity. So that's what I actually pursued. And I pursued it with a company called Dynamicsoft. And yeah, the company grew really rapidly. When I started there, I was employee 43. And within about a year, I was 43 of 220. And Cisco came in and made an offer to buy the company. And it was really, I think the best part about Dynamicsoft was to be there in the kind of in the driver's seat of watching a company grow that rapidly, the good and the bad, right? And I don't have bad things to say about Dynamicsoft, but every company makes mistakes along the way. And just to see some of the kind of both the massive success of the company, but also some of the hiccups we had, helped me as I started to, was part of the startup of two other companies.
A couple things I just want to tease out for listeners. So
Sure.
I love what you were saying about the internship. And it's, sometimes when I talk to veterans, it's like, man, if you could engineer lots of little internships, because, in a month or two, you learn so much. You can say like, for you, oh, I thought I wanted to do investment banking. This is not what I want at all. And so, sometimes we think of these career moves in terms of 2 or 3 years. That comment about internships reminded me of like, man, you can get so much information even a week in shadowing someone at a company and say, is this the right size of company, the right role, the right industry, the right company itself? So many more data points. So I love that piece. And then I love too that this opportunity came about through meeting someone with a similar background, and you met this Naval Academy graduate who was a Marine. It sounds like you had never even thought of product management, but you were open to that. And again, I know that a lot of our listeners are obviously trying to be as methodical and forward thinking about a career transition as possible. And despite all the planning, sometimes it's these quote unquote random interactions that end up leading to a big opportunity, which is one of the reasons I advocate for listeners to have as many coffee chats and just meet as many people as possible, because you never know where those conversations will lead. I mean, case in point, even our conversation right now came out of a conversation where I didn't know this would come from it. So I love that part of your story.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I've done throughout my career is when I get the opportunity to talk to veterans, every now and then I'll just get an email out of the blue, either a Naval Academy graduate or a Marine from a buddy of a Marine, or my friend's daughter who is getting out of the Marine Corps will contact me. And one of the things I do is say, hey, I know it might sound weird, like they're not an MBA, an internship's not like in an MBA, it's a normal path, right? But if there's a company you're interested in or a type of job you're interested in, go ask them for an internship. And it might even have to be unpaid, but if it's a matter of weeks for you to get to know if that's something that works for you, like, go for it. And you're going to impress them, right? Like, it's your chance to also impress somebody. So it's a very no risk really way to go. And if maybe it doesn't take the form of an internship, maybe it has to be a 6-week contract, like just to work as a contractor somewhere. But I've actually hired quite a few people that way over the years, in both VisitPay and other companies I've worked in. So I definitely agree with what you're saying.
Well, let's fast forward. I know we'll kind of go back to this point in time, but I want to fast forward to today. If you ran into someone in the Air Force or random Army guy or gal, and they said, "Man, Vincent, what is it VisitPay? What do you do?" How do you answer that? How do you explain your company?
Yeah, great question. So, we actually have a mission at VisitPay. So, like you said, three of our seven people on our leadership team are in the military. Mission's a big part of our company. My co-founder and CEO doesn't have a military background, but mission's a big part of how he operates. So, our mission is our mission is to help people manage their healthcare bills for good, right? And we look at those people as both the patients who you'd expect are part of that equation, but also the health systems, right? There's about 2,900 hospitals in the United States. We actually happen to be deployed now in 250 of them, which is I'm really proud of. And what we do is we basically help them, as you all know, medical bills have increased a lot. What we were doing is helping those health systems give them the tools they need to really help their patients manage those bills, create both the transparency so people can understand their bills, which is fundamentally lacking in healthcare, but also the tools they need and the flexibility they need to easily pay their bills over time. So when the average healthcare bill now is $800 and it only used to be a $25 copay, things have changed radically, and our software and our whole solution is built really around that purpose, to help both the health systems and the patients pay their bills very flexibly and transparently over time.
What was the genesis? Like when did this idea come about?
Yeah, so I probably one of the background things I should have said earlier was I also had experience working at Capital One. So my only let's call it non-startup experience, I wouldn't say non-entrepreneurial experience, because even though Capital One was a really big company, it was very entrepreneurial in nature. I worked in a division that was one of the smallest divisions in the company, and I'd left that division, and the guy who actually started that division and sold it to Capital One is now my co-founder named Kent Ivanoff. And in summer of 2009, he and I got together. We were both looking at doing something new, something entrepreneurial, something startup-y. And the Affordable Care Act was just coming on the scene, so it was no secret that healthcare bills were about to dramatically rise. Anything you read, any type of piece out there, consulting, Wall Street Journal, anything you read was predicting that healthcare bills were going to rise dramatically. So we felt like we had a unique skill set given our experience at Capital One, a very analytically driven way to help people manage their finances, pay their obligations over time is what we had in our background, and we felt like that the healthcare was the place to go do that. So we set out on a mission, like I said earlier, to build a solution that helped patients and healthcare systems pay their bills over time, manage their bills over time.
So was it kind of like is your co-founder's name Keith?
Kent.
So was it with Kent, like you guys just had a friendship and a working relationship, and you just kind of, it was almost like a starting point of like, let's find something in this space together to do, but it was almost like the partnership was there first and the exact idea specifics came second.
Actually, neither. I know I might have portrayed it that way. Kent and I only met in passing. So he was literally on his way out of the division that he started to go on to bigger and better things. He actually ultimately was running the entire, they call it the subprime card, which is by far the largest part of Capital One. So he was back running that in Richmond. And like you, he's a Stanford B School grad. And I had just come in Boise. And then, like I said, about three years later, a common friend of ours had coffee with Kent, I think on Tuesday, and then had coffee with me on Wednesday. And he's like, you two guys are like saying almost exactly the same thing. You both want to start companies. You're both interested in software. You're both interested in finance, right? Analytics. And he's like, and he with an email, he put us together. So even though we knew each other and knew of each other, we had actually never worked together. And then, we almost spent 6 months working on a business plan before we actually got the company off the ground. We
Wow.
started working together in July of 2009, and we incorporated in January of 2010. So we really spent those first 5-6 months just iterating on a business plan, iterating really rapidly, getting that plan in front of people. And I like to say, fail fast, right? Like,
Yeah.
get something developed, put it on paper, see how an audience reacts to it, knowing that there's a good chance it's going to fall on deaf ears, right? And having the kind of resilience and the thick skin to know each time you're just iterating, right? You're iterating on an idea, and you got to keep working on it till you find something that sticks. And that's what Ken and I really dug deep on in those first 4 or 5 months of working together.
Was that 4 or 5 months? Were you guys full time on this? Were you guys kind of working somewhere and just on nights and weekends doing this? Like, what did that period look like?
We had both left a previous employer knowingly, and and we're both looking to do something new. So yeah, we were full time on it. I
How
still was
long?
finding time to take vacations and spend time fishing and stuff, but it was definitely a full time adventure from the get go.
How long did it take? So, you have this coffee with this friend, he plays matchmaker, and then, you and Kent connect. How long was it from there until you both said, you know what, let's do this full time? I'm always curious, like, what that run up period is like for people before they have the confidence to say, like, okay, I'm going all in on this rather than just daydreaming.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to go back and look at emails and see exactly how that evolved. But I would say it was about a month from the time we first met to the time we actually started to meet in an office and start working together. I
That's so
immediately had,
wild.
I had a lot of respect for Kent by reputation because he had run the business I was working in, and everybody, of course, knew him and talked about him. But within, of course, one of the most important thing in that first month was developing mutual respect. And I can't speak for Kent, right? But I can speak for me, knowing that I immediately, right away, knew I respected his competence for sure. Like I said, he's Stanford B school guy, tons of financial and business acumen, but his ethics was right away. You could start to tell how somebody operates, and so that was a huge part of it. But we did things outside of work because we had no employer yet, but he and I would go fishing. I remember spending a couple nights fishing with him, and I like to fish, in case you haven't figured out by now. But like just getting to know him as a person, he was a family person. He had two boys that were exactly the same space of age of my kids. They're older, but that had to develop that mutual respect in that month. And then we both looked at each other and said, this seems like a really big market it feels like a good idea. Let's go get it. And that's what we did.
I love that. And I want to just emphasize for listeners, it seems like, although you didn't have a direct relationship, like you had a shared heritage at Capital One, you knew his reputation. So you had some data points there. And then I love just getting to know him like you would anyone, fishing and downtime and just comparing values. Cause I do see so many partnerships that fracture. You're part of the very small group. 12 plus year, almost 12 years now working together. It's rare, just like in romantic relationships, it's rare to see a marriage that lasts that long. So I love to hear about, that vetting process, even though it was a month and kind of a short period, you still had a lot of data points to go off of, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. And, we again had that shared heritage. I asked a lot of people that worked with Kent, what was he like working with? And all things that all things that made sense to me and told me that he was somebody that I'd want to work with. And I'm sure he did the same diligence on me, right? And but all of it, the real trust and develop comes when you're working together and spending time together, which I think was ultra important.
One of the things that stuck out when you and I connected for our first call was like, I feel like we put a lot of emphasis in popular media around, Instagram now as a dated example, but kind of have an idea, a year later you sell it for a ton of money. And your story, I think, is probably more representative of successful companies, which is 12 years, which in startup years is like 100 years, but like really staying with it and growing. And I'm curious, we can zoom in, but as you look back on the last 12 years, has it kind of been slow and steady growth? Has it been periods of like skyrocketing and then dropping down and having to cut employees? Like what has that journey been like at a glance?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably not exactly like any other company or curve, but I was very flat for a long time. And part of that was by design, right? We came in knowing we didn't have the grand idea. I've actually never met an entrepreneur. I'm sure they're out there, but I've never met an entrepreneur who said I had the grand idea and it never had to change it. And that's what I did, right? we had an idea that we wanted to help solve, how healthcare bills get paid in the United States of America. We wanted something national in scope because we had the ego to believe we can go solve that, or the confidence to believe we can go solve that. So our first 4 or 5 years were pretty flat, and what we were doing is really just continually iterating on that idea we started with. Right, we were continuing to fail fast, and then once we felt like we finally had it, we had this payment platform idea that was going to leverage the analytics we had developed and the intelligence that we had developed over those first 4 or 5 years. Our growth curve definitely started to, I don't want to say it hockey stick, but it definitely ramped. We went from having three or four clients for quite a while to now we're already up to, in the high teens in terms of the number of clients we have. And our clients are really large health systems, all with many different hospitals and usually hundreds to thousands of physicians that are part of that system. So it was a slow growth at first. It's been steady since we hit that kind of curve, that curve point. And I also would say we've never, knock on wood, we've never gone through a phase where we've cut employees. We've definitely been through some challenging times, but we've also invested very conservatively. That's I think one of the keys, right? Is we very deliberately, and we've taken risks, don't get me wrong, but we've also invested very conservatively as we've gone. When we know we have that idea right, we know we have something, we have enough proof to go forward, then we've taken on either outside capital and made sure that when we hired employees, we had enough capital to warrant the hire. I've worked in places where that wasn't the case, and that's made me feel really good about this organization.
Roughly how many years was it between starting and then you kind of like hit that first inflection point?
Yeah, it was like 4 years probably.
Okay.
Part of that too, Justin, is healthcare's a big, slow market, right? And so sometimes getting a healthcare system to decide to buy your software can be over a year. It's not like that in every market. If you're in a business to consumer market, it's not going to be like that. But that is unique to our market. So we've actually had clients in multi-year sales cycles since we started. So that's been taken a lot of patience, and that's not a virtue, I would say. That's not like one of my top virtues, I would say. But
I really admire that though, because 4 years is a long time. And the interview that went out just before this, I interviewed another entrepreneur, Chris Hsu, and one of the pieces of advice he had for entrepreneurs is like, oftentimes people stick with a bad idea too long and they kind of stay there too long. So I'm kind of in my mind, that's on one extreme is like the people where it's like, dude, you need to move on. And then there's also on the other extreme, people that would not have waited that 4 years for that maybe more period of validation. And I'm just kind of curious for aspiring entrepreneurs, do you have advice on like what allowed you during those 4 years where things weren't skyrocketing to know like, hey, this is worth sticking with it? Like, how did you know to stay the course versus thinking maybe I'm crazy or should be doing something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that is the virtue. Oh, Kent has a lot of virtues that are, better than mine. He is 3 or 4 times now since we started the company said, it's time to crumble this up and rewrite the code, or it's time to crumble this up and start again. And I would say, while I might have gotten there, I would have been slower than, not probably, I was slower than he was in terms of making that kind of that bold decision. It's a bold decision when you do that. I would say what gave us the knowledge to do that, or when Kent led that, was we always had the data coming back from the market, right? So I remember when we first deployed VisitPay, within about 6 months, we saw how valuable the software was to the patients, but we also knew that the way we wrote it was probably not going to be scalable, right? And so we said, we could probably go add a bunch of healthcare systems right now to this thing, but let's actually take the time to basically go rewrite this to know that it's scalable, right? When a lot of times you write a beta solution, there's going to be limitations to it. And so we could have added a bunch of systems probably right away and started marketing right away, but we actually stepped back and said, hey, let's go rewrite this now, right? And that was Kent led that decision, and he gets credit for that, and it was definitely the right thing to do. But what gave us the confidence to do it was actually the returns we were seeing. Like, we were seeing patients paying at a rate that was significantly higher than they were paying in the healthcare system prior to us being involved. And real importantly, we were seeing the satisfaction rates of the patients as being super high. And so when patients are paying more and they're happier, like, you got something good on your hands. And I would say, maybe to shorten my answer, is we were collecting the data to make those decisions with confidence.
One thing I really respect, and this is having spent 10 years in entrepreneurship myself, is hearing your story. Like you and your team and you and Kent as co-founders, like you're blending two very different skill sets, like the rapid iteration that you talk about, those first 5 to 6 months where you're putting bad answers in front of prospective clients, getting feedback, changing. Like that's a very powerful skill as an entrepreneur. But then coupling that, driving the Ferrari, coupling that with, hey, we've kind of cracked the code, but this rapid iteration product that we have won't scale. So let's back off. Let's rewrite it from scratch. Like that's like a methodical, very, it's just amazing to see those two skills in tandem where, I see times in my life where I'm just full speed ahead and iterating when I should be slowing down and really refining things to scale. And I've also seen times when I'm just kind of polishing the Titanic and it, never gets put to use and it gets thrown out. I just want to point out to listeners, that's such, you're exemplifying two incredible traits that when they're coupled together, it's powerful to see that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'd say that's where, like, the importance of a partnership is so valuable. I think to myself, could I have started a company on my own and been successful? I'm sure there's things I could have done where I would have been successful, but I also know our company could not have been I wouldn't have been as successful without Kent, right? Like he was more of that strategic slow down. Like, I like your analogy, right? Slow down the entire process and let's just stop that iteration cycle to step back, right? And Kent's really good at that. And I'm more about turning those 2-week sprints and turning a great product out, because we use sprint kind of methodology and how we develop software. And so having both of us together, I think, has made the company more powerful. And then as we brought on leadership team, where everybody on our leadership team brings a different perspective into that kind of whole process, which has been great, right? And so I haven't mentioned them on this call, but like, the rest of the leadership team we have around us has been absolutely invaluable, and the different perspectives that they've added over time too. So
one thing I want to ask about with that, like now you've got all of these leaders around you, but I'm just guessing that in 12 years, in going from 2 people to 100 people, I'm guessing that there's almost like slices of the company. Like it's almost like, the Paleolithic era, and there's like these different eras of 4 or 5 different companies that you've been a part of. When you look back, like how has your involvement in the company evolved since it was the two of you just iterating together till now? Like how is like your day-to-day life and your involvement evolved?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny you call them eras. For me, it's very easily to associate the era to the office we were in, because as we've grown, we've gone to Kent's basement, to actually working inside a hospital system, to it. We worked in a lawyer's office. And so I think of always them in time. The slices are always in this building, this building. Now we're in a really cool building that we actually had custom built for us, which is really awesome. But to answer your question, when you're early, you have so many different things that you're responsible for, right? I was responsible for resetting the modem at night, taking out the trash, no joke, right? To paying the bills, running the accounting software, and as the company grows over time, of course, the number of things that you're actually responsible, while your responsibility goes up because of the size of the company and the size of the pie has grown, the number of things that you're responsible for actually gets narrowed, right? So I've shifted to be solely responsible for the product and the product vision of the company, which is what I really love to do. It's allowed me to focus on what I really love to do, which is the product development side of things. And I've also gotten a lot more involved than I ever thought I would in the sales side of things, right? Partially maybe being a co-founder, but I've been there every step away for the product. So I think that the unique thing I could bring to the table is that long-term product perspective. And so that's probably how I think I've shifted more than I thought I would. It's been just, shifting more of my time into the sales side of the equation.
That's great. I always think of it in in submarine terms of like, I was a division officer, and had I stayed in it, would have been a department head. And I saw department heads that were probably good as division officers, but never adapted to that next phase. And they kind of fell short as a department head. And so when I see someone with your long track record at a company, it's like, I just imagine you have to shift gears so much and change and evolve. And one thing I wanted to ask is, how, have you found any resources that have helped you evolve? I don't know if there's like books that everyone's different. Some people are like, yeah, there's these books that have helped me, or podcasts or website, or is it just kind of learning on the go, or like what's kind of helped you stay limber and continue to grow with the company?
That's a good question. It's definitely no one thing. I, again, always have faults in terms of, staying in one spot too long and then realizing like, whoa, I should have changed already, right? Like, I think having Kent there as a partner and an inspiration definitely helps. Having a leadership team around me, not only do I look at them as peers, I look at them as ways to get feedback and mentors, right? We all have different capabilities where we're mentoring each other every day. I also have mentors outside the company. I think that's important. There's 2 or 3 people that I regularly interact with that are good at certain things I know they're good at, and I look to them for mentorship, for feedback, for coaching. Set up coffees with them and have discussions. I think that's one of the biggest kind of sources of how I like try to develop myself.
I love that. I remember from our first conversation, you had talked about Robert Mittendorf, who I believe is on your board or advisors from Norwest. And I imagine, I can only imagine the quality of advice you get from someone like that and how that shapes your thinking. And one question I have for listeners is, any advice with their, let's say, mentors as they find them, like how frequently to meet with them? Like, do you ever give them equity in the company, or is it like more of just like a friendship, or like how to make sure that you're not overstepping your bounds in terms of asking for advice or feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a set answer to that. Like, I think it depends on the person you're interacting with. Maybe more as an anecdote to share is like Kent and I actually had it. One of our similarities when we met was we had a common mentor. We didn't know it when we met. He is actually a former Navy person. He was a naval officer back in the 70s or something, and he had started one of the first software companies in Boise, which was an accounting software that was very successful. That sold, I think, to like AT&T or something. But he was a mentor to us independently, and over the years, I've definitely engaged him on different questions and different kind of just opportunities to speak with him and learn from him. And there was never a set pattern of doing that. Maybe there was times where I met with him within 60 days or a couple months apart, and other times it's more like once a year, right? And so and Kent and I both still stay in touch with him. And then there's other people, like there's peers, close friends of mine who are, again, really good at something that I know they're good at, and I look and I respect, and I'll meet with them much more regularly for coffee. I haven't given any of them equity in the company, right? But it is something that I think you should consider it, to the extent that if that person's really involved or has a turnkey kind of thing that they've done for you, I would definitely consider the equity piece.
And I also wanted to ask about, you co-authored a book, The Marine Corps Way. What would you want listeners to know about that book, and also just kind of that process of writing a book for you?
Yeah, wow. So again, that was about 20 years ago almost, and it was a book that evolved out of a business school project that a fellow Marine and I did while we were at the Wharton School. And so we were fortunate enough to both write papers as part of our curriculum, and his first got picked up by Harvard Business Review, and then mine got reviewed, and we got a book offer out of it. And so I don't want to say it was just something we stumbled upon, because we worked really hard at kind of creating this. The work that we did was, part of the curriculum we did at Wharton in leadership. But the book really is, what we did was we really broke down the Marine Corps framework for how they go to battle, which is called maneuver warfare. And we broke it down into like kind of the essential components of what maneuver warfare was. And then we applied that to business. And we said, here's we broke it down into 7 principles. And we said, here's a principle as it applies to business. Here's an example of it as it looked in the military. And then we always, in every single case, we paralleled it with an example of from business, and tried to bring it really to life for the reader on how to apply that principle, which is at its foundation was a military principle, but applied it to business. Writing it was really intense because I think we got an offer and we had like 4 months to write the book or something like that. And McGraw-Hill was the publisher, and so I think I locked myself in an attic literally for like 4 months to write that book, but it was incredibly rewarding, right? I was an engineer, so I wasn't like a writer before that. I learned so much about writing. I always said I got basically like a 2-year master's degree in English just by writing that book. And I just getting it and seeing on a shelf back then. This was like when Amazon was first coming on the scene, right? So you actually saw your book in a bookstore on a shelf, and that was pretty cool. And so that was hugely rewarding in my mind. And the book did fairly well. It's been printed, I think, in 4 languages now, and sold about. Last I looked, it was in the 40,000 kind of copy range, which isn't like, it's not Barack Obama bestseller, but it's I respect, respectable in terms of how many copies it sold. And it's kind of cool. 20 years later, you'll be sitting on an airplane or in business, and somebody will say they read your book, and it's a pretty cool feeling.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
One thing I also wanted to ask about is, so, a large part of our audience, let's say half of our audience is on active duty. And I know many people want to become entrepreneurs. And one of the questions for them is like, do I do that right out of the gates, or do I go either get educational experience or work experience, or in your case, both? And I'm just kind of curious your thoughts for someone in that position, someone who wants to start something, whether you would advise to pick up skills at school or in the workplace, or just how to approach that thought of like when to do it.
Yeah, really good questions you're asking. I think it depends on the person, right? For me, I think it would have been really hard to jump straight out of the military into business without having that some business fundamentals. So I'm sure there's people that can do that or have an idea that makes sense for them to go pursue without any type of business experience. I would think that would be the exception based on my experience. So getting either an educational background or getting some practical hands-on experience before you go launch your own idea probably makes sense for more people, right? So I definitely would recommend that. I'd also, you've already brought it up, but I'm going to bring it up again just because I think it's so important, is to network with other veterans. I can't tell you how many times I contacted a veteran, especially when it's somebody from your own service, but not limited to my own service, right? I contact a Marine or somebody who was in the Army, and I say, hey, I'd like to network with you, and just start there. And I think networking with other veterans, especially that might be in the domain that you plan to work in, is super important. And I've never been denied a request to network with a veteran, and I can say I've never denied one myself, because I just think it's so important to do that networking and ask questions, and maybe you do have what it takes to go start right away without any any experience. But I would definitely make sure you are eyes wide open in terms of what it's going to take, and I think networking is a great way to help with that.
Awesome. Well, I always like to leave the last question open-ended, which is, we've covered a lot of ground here, but is there either anything we didn't talk about that you want listeners to know, or just any final thoughts you'd like to leave with listeners?
Yeah. One thing I did want to add is, there's a lot of really great organizations out there that there's some real obvious ones out there, right? Like you can go Google, get help, how veterans can get help, how veteran entrepreneurs can get help, and, anything from, getting veteran-oriented loans, SBA loans, things like that. But like right here in Boise, there's a organization called Mission 43 that is exclusively geared to helping veterans transition from the military to civilian life. And whether that's veterans who are retiring, but the more common one is veterans who are looking for jobs, and specific call out for Mission 43. But at the same time, I know in other communities there's organizations like that are really out there looking and with the exact mission to help veterans. And in talking with, like, the reason I bring up Mission 43 is I know that the one of the leaders of that organization is like, they're always looking to help more and more veterans, right? I would say not enough veterans are even coming to them, and they They're out there with that exclusive purpose. And so definitely tap organizations like that as well, and go and look for the ones that are specific to your community as well.
Awesome, Vincent. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll put in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.org, link to Mission 43, as well as the book, The Marine Corps Way, so you can check that out. But thank you for your time and advice today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you doing this, Justin. This is really important and really meaningful. So thanks for the service you're providing in doing this. So thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it.
Surface.
Beyond the Uniform is written and produced by me, Justin Nassiri, with help from our Chief of Staff, Steve Bain, and our editor, Kathleen Dillon. We are an all-volunteer organization and would greatly appreciate your help in any of the following ways. First, spread the word. Beyond the Uniform has over 330 podcast episodes and 15 on-demand webinars, all offered for free. Help us spread the word on social media, at military bases, or whatever gets this resource in front of more men and women who need it. Positive reviews on iTunes go a long way towards this as well. Second, sponsorship. Beyond the Uniform relies on sponsorship to keep us going. There is so much more we'd like to do, but we don't have nearly the resources to do so. If you know of a company that would like to advertise in any way with Beyond the Uniform, please send them to beyondtheuniform.org. Third, donations. If you're in a financial position to donate, you can find more information on the support section of beyondtheuniform.org. At our website, beyondtheuniform.org, you'll also find 330 plus episodes categorized by industry, functional role, and more. You'll find a link for live events, typically 4 per month. You'll also find both free and for purchase books that take a deeper dive on topics related to career growth. Thank you for your support as we aim to help members of the military and their families thrive in their post-military career and life.